I'm Al, a staff member at the local zoo. No one could have imagined a supernatural event was about to unfold within our zoo, one that would completely change my life. These damn filthy apes. Ronnie cursed into the radio. What's going on out there? I asked, chuckling. I could hear the baboons screaming in the background of his call. Earlier that evening, the pretty weather reporter on TV had predicted a storm, but what I was seeing now was far worse than what she described. Gale-force winds and torrential rain were sweeping through the zoo. She'd said the downpour was supposed to lighten up in the next few hours, but it was only getting worse. They're really fussy tonight. I don't know what's wrong with them, Ronnie replied. It must be the storm. It'll probably get worse before it gets better. Animals have a sixth sense, you know? They know when serious trouble's coming. I told him, turning down the radio. Oh, come on, you know that pseudoscience hogwash. Ronnie yelled, just as I expected. He always got riled up when we talked about stuff like that. He couldn't stand nonsense, which was part of why we got along so great. On the day's shift, we had plenty of time to get to know each other, often walking around the zoo, shooting the breeze, telling visitors not to feed the animals, and occasionally dealing with annoying or drunk visitors. Everything changed the day after the first incident at the zoo. Several animals were found dismembered in their enclosures, and others were missing entirely. Because of this, we ramped up security and were forced to work night shifts until the police could figure out what happened. We didn't mind the reassignment since we got a slight raise and didn't have to deal with the heat during the day. Most importantly, there were no visitors around. I'm just messing with you, buddy. Don't get so worked up, I said, adding fuel to the fire. Screw you, Al. Ronnie yelled, then hung up. I walked over to an awning near a row of snack stands, trying to get out of the rain. I felt bad for Ronnie, as there was nowhere on his side of the zoo to shelter from the rain, except for the restrooms. Hey, Ronnie, why don't you just hide out in the restroom for a bit and wait for it to blow over? And give it a good clean while you're at it, I suggested. Shut up, Ronnie muttered back. Come on, I'm just trying to help, I replied, chuckling. I knew I'd gotten to him again. No, seriously, be quiet for a minute, Ronnie ordered seriously. In all our time working together, I'd never heard Ronnie say anything with such a straight face. It felt like hours before he replied. Just as I was about to hit the call button, a crackle of radio static startled me. Get your ass over here now, Ronnie shrieked. What's wrong? I replied. Seriously, buddy, whatever you're doing, drop it and get over here now. You need to see this. Ronnie's voice wavered through the static. Even though I was soaked and freezing, a chill went through me when I heard his last words. I'd never heard his voice so unsteady, with such an unmistakable fear in it. I'll be there as fast as I can. Hold tight. The radio crackled as I walked back from the snack stand shelter to where my golf cart was parked. The plastic canopy offered little protection from the torrential rain for the console. Everything was soaked and dripping wet. I hopped in, turned the key, my hands trembling from the cold. I sat in the silent cart, which hummed along the zoo's black asphalt paths toward the primate enclosure where Ronnie was waiting for me. The zoo was empty and silent. Too silent. Why were we working on a night like this? Why couldn't we just stay put in the office and wait this out? Now he was messing with the apes again. These thoughts buzzed in my head, and I increasingly began to weigh how badly I really needed this job. When I reached the baboon enclosure, Ronnie was standing by the cage, his plastic poncho flapping behind him in the wind. He looked like a comic book superhero. I slammed on the brakes, pulling the cart up behind him, but he didn't turn around. The primate's screams were frantic, high-pitched, and constant, setting my teeth on edge. Trapped out in this horrible weather, they certainly wouldn't be happy, but I could tell from my friend's posture that there was more to it. I jumped from the golf cart seat as a flash of lightning split the sky, followed by a rumble of thunder, deep, loud, and right on top of us. The baboon screams intensified. I felt like I'd walked into a scene from 2001, A Space Odyssey. I half expected to see a giant black monolith rise from the center of the enclosure. I walked up to my buddy. Ronnie, what the hell is going on? What's wrong with him? He still didn't turn around. Torrential rain streamed down his face as he stared into the center of the cage. I followed his gaze to where a group of screeching monkeys were gathered around something. They were feeding, tearing at the flesh and sinew of an animal carcass lying among them. Ronnie's gaze was distant and unfocused, as if he were staring 1,000 miles away. It was the blank, unfocused stare of someone numbed by wartime trauma. "It's a person," he said slowly. "There's a human body in there." I scanned the top of the enclosure, feeling a wave of nausea. Whoever was being torn apart by that frantic group of baboons, I figured he must have gotten in from above. There was an unervingly low railing at the top of the enclosure that led to the main level of the park. During the day, people could watch the baboons playing from up there. A few times in the past, some idiots had decided to climb over the railing to play with the baboons. Only once had anyone actually made it into the enclosure, but the guards pulled them out before the baboons got to them. This person hadn't been so lucky. "What the hell are we supposed to do?" Ronnie said blankly, staring at a rather large baboon casually gnawing on a chunk of meat. I stood frozen, unsure of the best course of action. Obviously, we couldn't go in there getting caught between wild animals, and their food was unwise. And frankly, there was no point. The person inside was clearly dead. Risking our lives for a corpse wasn't a smart move, especially for the meager salary we earned. "We'd better call the boss," I said, turning toward the exit to the exhibit area. "I think we should call the police immediately," Ronnie told me. We walked back to the small office and picked up our dry cell phones. After the previous incidents, the boss had explicitly told us to contact him first, and he'd handle it. He'd said our pay wasn't enough to deal with this crap. He was right about that. When I reminded Ronnie of this, he didn't seem happy. He started muttering complaints, a little spray of rain coming out with every movement of his lips. I picked up my phone and scrolled through to George's contact information. After a few rings, his wife answered, her soft greeting sounding groggy from being woken up. "Hello, Mrs. S. Is George there? Something's happened again." My voice trembled slightly. "It's serious." She yawned. "Hi, Al." George said he was going to work tonight. Said there was some kind of problem with the security system. "You haven't seen him?" I put my hand over the receiver so she couldn't hear me, then turned to Ronnie. His face was a little pale. "Have you seen George tonight?" He just shook his head. "We haven't seen him. We'll keep an eye out." She yawned again. "All right. Honey, you two be careful out there in the storm." Our only option now was to call the police. I didn't like it, but it would be even worse if we had to go looking for George in this storm. Ronnie seemed to sigh in relief. More color came back to his face. "I'll call them," he said. "All right. I don't want to call them either, but I'm going back to the ape enclosure to make sure everything's secure," I said as Ronnie started dialing. The office was near the ape enclosure, and I could still hear the monkeys screaming from here. I walked to the top of the enclosure and carefully checked the locks. Finding the lock solid, I sighed, leaned my weight on the railing, and tilted my head to the left, trying not to look down. My attention focused on one of the trees, and that's when I noticed the piece of clothing hanging there. George had gone on a trip with his wife a few years ago. He'd come back with a red hat and seemed to have been stuck to his head ever since. My stomach lurched. I rushed back to the office, pushed open the door, and yelled to Ronnie, "Damn, Ronnie. I think that's George. His hat is in the enclosure." Ronnie froze, his thumb hovering over the call button, staring at me. Then he blinked. "No way." I sighed. "Yeah, impossible. I can't believe it myself." "No, I mean, it's really impossible. George never went anywhere near those things. You know, he always said, 'These damn, filthy apes.' He hated them, but his hat was hooked on a branch, covered in brown and deep red stains. Other than that, the jumbled guts lying at the bottom of the enclosure were now unrecognizable. His hat's in there, Ronnie." He shook his head a little too emphatically. "That doesn't mean anything. It could have just fallen off. Maybe the wind blew it in." Ronnie hit call and put the phone to his ear. I slumped into the chair beside him, barely able to hear him requesting police and ambulance support. I closed my eyes as the rain turned to a pattering against the windows. Hail was starting to fall, leaving light beads of ice on the ground. By the time Ronnie tried for the third time to explain, we were at the intersection of 5th and 8th Avenues, not 6th and 7th. The hail was already golf ball sized. Meanwhile, the cries coming from the park changed from excited chatter to frantic screams. The lemurs in the enclosure next to the office ran around, trying to hide under trees, but to no avail. Hailstones pounded against the iron bars, shattering into pieces. Some even broke through the gaps, exploding like grenades on the ground inside. Unlucky animals were hit directly by the hail, some with snapped ribs, others with heads turned to bloody mush, their bodies crumpled to the ground. Animals that found hiding spots fought for space, pushing smaller, weaker ones out into the open. "Damn it," Ronnie said, hanging up the phone. I could barely hear them. The dispatcher couldn't hear a word I was saying. "This storm is f***ing awful. I think we're stuck here for the night, Ronnie." No sooner had the words left my mouth than there was a loud bang over our heads. It sounded like the roof was about to shatter. The office shook. Then another bang and another. Ronnie and I both jumped from our seats, staring up at the ceiling, feeling like it could collapse on us at any moment. "That hail must be basketball-sized to make sounds like that," I told Ronnie. We both walked to the office door and into the administrative section. As we approached the window and looked out, several more loud thuds came from the roof. Neither of us spoke as we watched the scene outside the window. On the pavement outside the office, we saw dozens of animal carcasses scattered around. We couldn't tell what kind of animals they were. Every body was a puddle of bloody, mashed guts. Broken bones ripped through skin and fur. They looked just like George's body in the baboon enclosure. Ronnie lowered his head and vomited, still in shock. I could only stare straight ahead, watching animals continuously falling from the sky. On God's green earth, it's raining animals, big and small. Ronnie looked up at me, pale, wiping the vomit from his mouth. He stared at me in disbelief. The pounding on the roof continued relentlessly above us. I stared out the window, watching the animal carcasses pelt down on the pavement. Body after body rained down with the hail. Huge masses of muscle, blood, and guts exploded on the zoo's asphalt paths, splattering everywhere. "I'm worried the roof is going to collapse," Ronnie said. His eyes were wild. "We're facing the apocalypse now, buddy." His words were interrupted by a sound from outside. It was a guttural, eerie shriek, deeper and louder than any thunder I'd ever heard. "What the hell was that sound?" I said. "We have to get out of here." "No!" Ronnie yelled. "What the hell is wrong with you, man? It's raining animals out there." I didn't care. I ran toward the door and burst out into the cold, chaotic storm. It was a scene of slaughter, animal bodies strewn everywhere, and the relentless hail and gale-force winds assailed me. Then I heard that sound again, that high-pitched cry. It shook me to my core and sent shivers down my spine. "Ow!" Ronnie yelled, tackling me from behind. We fell onto the concrete, and I saw a huge gorilla fall like a stone, exploding into a bloody mess right where I'd been standing. "Oh my God!" I yelled amidst the thudding of bodies hitting the pavement all around us. "Thanks, man." Ronnie was on top of me, body rigid, staring up at the sky. "Ronnie." I followed Ronnie's gaze. At first, I thought he was just watching the storm, but then a flash of lightning revealed what he was truly seeing. Though it was only for a second, what I saw was enormous, flying with massive wings. I knew it was there, so I could see it circling in the sky. It was circling the fresh splatter of meat behind us. I looked down at myself and saw that Ronnie and I were also covered in blood and guts. "Ronnie," I choked out, trying to stay calm. "Ronnie, we need to get back inside." Ronnie still stared fixedly at the sky. He was whimpering prayers to whatever god he worshipped. "Ronnie, damn it." I stood up, grabbed his arm, and started to drag him toward the building. "We have to get back inside now." I could hear the creature getting closer. Its wings vibrated the air, warning me that death was close by, and I could feel the tremor of its wings in the air. It cried out again, and I dropped Ronnie's arm, covering my ears. I looked at Ronnie again. He finally came to his senses and stood up. The cry seemed to have shaken him out of his paralysis. I took the opportunity to bolt through the door. "Hurry!" I yelled at Ronnie as he was still walking toward the building. He slipped on the blood on the ground and nearly fell, but he quickly regained his balance and continued running toward the door. A flash of lightning lit up the sky, and moments later, thunder boomed. Ronnie's eyes were wide with terror. Another deafening shriek came, shaking my eardrums as if they would burst. Whatever he saw gave him a second wind, and he quickly made it back inside. I slammed the door shut behind him and twisted the deadbolt into place. A second later, the door shook violently, as if a crowd of people were hammering on it. The sound of splintering would echo through the office, and a piercing shriek filled my soul with terror. I had no time to think before the window next to the door shattered, and something flew into the administrative office. It flapped around on the floor, trying to regain its bearings, no doubt dazed from the impact. I felt a tug at my arm as Ronnie dragged me into the security room. "Did you see that thing?" I yelled, knowing Ronnie must have seen it. A million questions swam in my mind. My adrenaline surged, making it impossible to voice what I wanted to say. I hoped he could give me some answers, reassure me about what kind of creature it was. "In the sky. They're everywhere," Ronnie answered through gritted teeth. I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from fear. "I only saw the giant one and the one in the office," I replied, confused. When the lightning flashed, I saw them all. They were circling above us. "Hundreds of them," Ronnie explained. A cold shiver went down my spine. Ronnie sat in a chair, putting his palms to his face. He wiped the blood from his eyes. I did the same, hoping to wipe the blood from my face too. "Coco," Ronnie said, as if he knew the answer to all the problems in our lives. "What about Coco?" I replied, "Dude, Coco's the one who got smashed onto the pavement right in front of us." Ronnie answered, eyes wide, nodding blankly. "Yeah, there are lots of animals out there. The whole damn zoo is splattered with blood," I replied, still not understanding what he meant. "Coco is a 300-pound gorilla," Ronnie said, looking at me like I was an idiot. "I don't know how that interesting fact helps us now," I said, feeling annoyed. "Whatever threw him down from the sky, that thing must be the size of a damn bus." Ronnie yelled at me, throwing his chair aside and pacing around the room. He yanked open his desk drawer and rummaged through it until he found a can of mace, which he tossed to me. "So what do we do now?" I asked, hoping to calm him down. "We barricade the door, huddle in a ball, and hope to God they don't break in," Ronnie replied, flipping the table over and bracing it against the door. I started looking around the room for anything else to reinforce our makeshift barrier, but found nothing. We moved the chairs to the door as well. Both of us sat there, listening to the pounding and the muffled cries between the rumbles of thunder. "I'll wake up." Ronnie shook me awake. I hadn't realized I'd fallen asleep. With all the thunder and shrieking, I thought I wouldn't be able to sleep, but my exhaustion must have overcome me at some point during the night. "What's wrong?" I asked, wiping the sleep from my eyes. Ronnie's eyes were bloodshot, and he had deep bags under them. He definitely hadn't slept all night. "It's morning. The storm has passed. The roof has been quiet for hours. I think it's safe out here, but I don't want to risk it without backup," Ronnie explained, pointing to the mace on the floor beside me. We walked out of the security room, trying to stay quiet. Ronnie led the way, carrying an improvised spear made from a broom handle he'd found in the closet. I followed behind him with the mace, ready to spray anything that rushed us. As soon as we stepped out of the office door, the smell of rotting flesh hit us. I tried to hold back my vomit, but the smell was too much. I emptied the contents of my stomach. Then we continued walking, covering our noses and making sure to breathe through our mouths. But it didn't make it any better. As we walked out of the hallway and into the administrative office, we heard chirping birds. I almost ran back to the security room, but Ronnie grabbed my arm and made me listen. They sounded nothing like the cries we'd heard the night before. We crept up to the broken window, stepping on broken glass and alerting the birds to our presence. A few birds turned their gaze to us, then immediately went back to feasting on their leftovers. They didn't care about us at all as we witnessed the gruesome sight that had been hidden by the night. Thousands of birds, drawn by the rotting stench of the zoo animals from miles away, flocked to feast on the remains left by the creatures from the night before. The bodies left by the creature birds looked like they had been torn apart, yet not a single piece of flesh had been eaten. Only the bones seemed to have been taken. So birds of all shapes, colors, and sizes pecked at the carrion with their blood-stained beaks. Before leaving the safety of the office, we scanned the sky for any sign of last night's creatures. Aside from a few birds circling overhead, there was no threat. We carefully walked to the parking lot, try to avoid slipping on the blood covering the ground. After charging up my phone, I called the police and told the dispatcher what had happened. When they told me they'd be there in an hour or two, I couldn't believe my ears. The storm had caused widespread damage across the state, leading to traffic accidents and down power lines, which made travel extremely difficult. All the on-duty personnel were stretched thin. Ronnie took the phone from my hand and tried to reason with the dispatcher, but it was clear that even if every animal on Earth had been killed, the police were more concerned with human lives first. Looking back, I can understand their logic, but after spending a night in the security room fearing being picked up into the air and dropped to our death by a creature, there was no more logic left in the world. We waited an hour before a single police officer arrived at the zoo. As he stepped out of his car, he covered his nose and started coughing from the smell in the air. The weather was getting warmer too, and with each passing hour, the smell would only get worse. The officer asked what had happened, and we told him the truth. He didn't believe us until we gave him a tour of our newly redecorated zoo. After he finished throwing up, he called for backup. I imagine everyone else who came to that horrific scene for the rest of the day had the same reaction. It's been nearly 12 years since that terrifying night. The zoo never reopened, and a month later, the zoo was leveled and the land was sold to a company that built a warehouse there. Ronnie and I learned through the grapevine that the zoo's administrators and others who worked there were told the reason for the zoo's closure was that the owner's moral views had shifted and he no longer allowed keeping animals in cages for entertainment. They were told the animals had been released into the wild or transferred to other zoos around the world. Any further inquiries went nowhere. The company offered very generous severance packages to the employees who lost their jobs. Ronnie and I received a large sum of money to compensate us for our troubles that night and in exchange for our silence. We had to sign a non-disclosure agreement to get paid. Unfortunately, the power of money is not to be underestimated. And for two guys who used to work security at a zoo, its power was simply irresistible. Besides, who would believe our story anyway? George's wife was the only issue the company needed to resolve. She reported him missing to the local police, who launched an investigation into his disappearance. He was last seen on surveillance footage buying a drink at a convenience store, then leaving and never being seen again. George simply vanished. It was painful knowing she was suffering while I had to keep quiet about it. Luckily, it was later discovered that George had taken out a life insurance policy through the zoo, and Mrs. S received a hefty payout. She quickly went silent about the matter too. A few months after George disappeared, she moved out of town and was never heard from again. For safety's sake, I've changed the names of the people involved and omitted many details, in case someone from the company's legal department stumbles upon this. Over a decade has passed, and I doubt anyone but me ever thinks about that zoo anymore, though I suppose Ronnie often thinks of it too. The scars left by that night will haunt me for the rest of my life. Even now, the sound of thunder chills my spine, and I frantically look for a place to hide. I've fantasized about seeing the silhouettes of beasts circling in the clouds, just waiting for me to step outside so they can pick me up into the air and drop me to my death. As I fall to the ground, all I can hear are their deafening cries. My bones would snap on impact and everything would go black, but I wouldn't be dead. The rotting smell of the animals would wake me from my near-death state. I'd see birds with bloody beaks pecking at the splattered animal remains. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Nothing was right anymore. Once that feeling passes, I'm fine again, and I can go on with my life, with only one lingering thought that haunts me to this day. They're still out there, and one day, those creatures will feel hungry again. Next time, they'll be bigger, and they'll eat creatures more like Coco than baboons.